Like many, I have my very own pile of shame, but as you can see, I'm not doing a very good job conquering it. However, one front that I continue to make progress on is my Old World Warhammer Bretonnian knights. You see, I've been painting them in a variety of different heraldry, and recently I was inspired by the Sacred Kingdom from the animated Overlord movie. I loved how passionate and devout the prominent characters were, like Remedios, the leader of the Holy Paladins, and Neia, Ainz's attendant turned prophet. And that was enough to earn them the right to serve as my Knight of the Realm standard bearer's colors. As I get started pre-highlighting my model via dry brushing, I want to explain to you why I assembled the knight the way that I did. As you might have noticed, I went with one of the more tame helmet designs from the Knights of the Realm kit. That's because one of my goals with this newest addition to my unit is to specifically capture the vibe of the paladins from the Sacred Kingdom, whose armor doesn't feature the same ornamentation as classically seen on the Bretonnian knight helmets. My idea? Keep the knight and the horse simple so that I can destroy my forearm later with some freehand on the banner and shields. So after dry brushing on several layers of progressively lighter grays with a final highlight color using a bright white, my model was fully primed and ready for more paint. And I thought I should begin with the Noble Knight's steed. It took me a while to determine the perfect blue to represent that of the Sacred Kingdom's heraldry. But when I finally decided on Wolf's Gray, I immediately got started using it on the caparison covering the horse's armor. The second half of the caparison I painted white, which is the other main color from the Sacred Kingdom's heraldry of purity and light. I treated it the same way that I did the blue, just this time using a few more layers to make sure that I got the proper opacity I was looking for. In the end, I achieved the look I wanted, but I realized I was way overeager wanting to work on the caparison when there is another part of this model that I should have started with. You see, I should have followed my own advice from previous painting tutorials and started with the most recessed area on the model first. In this case, the horse's face and legs. But that's exactly what I did not do because I was overeager to work on the uniform. I was working on the horse live with YouTube's chat and they helped me determine that the perfect breed for this horse would be Palmino, as it would go with the good guy aesthetic of the Sacred Kingdom. And I have to say that I fully agree. Those golden color tones work perfectly with the angelic color scheme I'm already using. It took me a while to achieve the color that I wanted, going back and forth between my yellow-brown contrast colors and traditional light yellow acrylics, which I both dry brushed on as well as glazed until I finally nailed the look for the coat that I wanted. Hey guys, it's just me and Shay here jumping into the video to remind you to hit that subscribe button, as well as to smash that like button if you've been enjoying the content with us today, because I really like having Shay on. And if you want to see her come back, you should definitely subscribe. Now, if you want even more content with us, you can check the links below. We have links to both our safe for work content as well as our spicier content. So there's plenty for you to explore. Now, let's go ahead and get back to the video. With the knight's noble steed's body and fur fully painted, I can now turn my attention back to the detail work on the caparison. First, I applied a light wash to the white and blue fabrics to enhance the shadows that I had lost in the folds previously. Then it was time for the first of the fun parts, the first of 3 major freehand portions I want to do on my Champion of Light. For the caparison, I went with a simple chevron design, which can be seen on a lot of the Paladin's uniform, including Remedios's from the movie. First, I sketched my design out using a pencil so that I would have a guide to follow with my brush, which I then used to apply multiple thin coats of white paint and then blue paint afterwards to finish off the design and clean anything up that needed it. Following that, a slight glaze of the same blue wash I used before to keep the blues consistent. Then I decided to do the exact same thing on the 4 shields on either side of the caparison, dividing them into quarters just like I had done on my previous knight. You can go watch that video after this. And I'll probably do this on every horse's shields going forward, as it's a great way to unify the unit despite their wildly different color schemes. For the shields, I used blue and white, the 2 main colors of the Sacred Kingdom's heraldry. And to represent the paladins, I used silver as my 3rd color. With silver still wet on my brush, I immediately moved on to the horse's armor, starting with the chanfron, the shields on his reins, and even his raised hooves to give the proper impression of horseshoes. While the paladins I'm basing my knight on don't have a lot of gold embellishments, Bretonnian knight models are adorned with tons of little details, and I thought it would be nice to embellish them with a little bit of gold. Specifically the shields surrounded by silver so that they pop out from their frame. The bottom of the raised hooves was bare, so I looked up what a proper shoed horse's foot looked like and painted mine to match. Then it was time to work on all of the leather straps and the saddle, which I decided to use snakebite leather on. Probably still one of my all-time favorite contrast colors, especially from the first line. It just does its job so well. Back to the metallics for a moment. They are far too bright, so to knock back that shininess, I applied a single coating of Nuln Oil. And to soften the almost cartoony look of the hooves, I applied a light brown wash, which I think knocked them back really nicely and made them look a lot more realistic. After that, I painted the sculpted supports green to make them look like tufts of grass. That way I could obfuscate them more easily when I actually applied tufts later. And finally, a quick coating of texture paint, applied thinly so it would dry faster. After using my finger to clean up a little bit of excess texture paint, I let it dry for a couple hours and then came back in with a final light brown dry brush to enhance the dirt. And with that, our knight's noble steed is complete, and we can work on his rider. This time, I did start with the most recessed area on the model, which happened to be our knight's pants. I chose the same blue that I used on the horse previously, as their uniforms should match. I had refrained myself from using too much silver on the horse, as the main colors for the Sacred Kingdom are white and blue, where I wanted to emphasize the paladin's purity with a bright silver. And that's exactly what I did. I used that bright silver in multiple layers so that I got a smooth and even consistency, taking my time to be thorough with this color before moving on to our final main color, white. I painted white on the shield, and then every remaining piece of unpainted cloth on the knight also received this color, mainly his surcoat and the decorative fabric on his helmet. After that, I returned to my gold paints, this time emphasizing the details on his weapons as well as the fleur-de-lis at the top of the banner. Something that I did consider modifying because it's not really part of the Sacred Kingdom's iconography. However, desecrating a representation of the lady on a Bretonnian knight model just felt wrong, so I left it as is. I felt great about how everything had turned out thus far, so it was time to start working on the more challenging details of our knight, like his face. I started as I do with all of my living human skin tones, with a wash of Magos purple for a warm base coat. Then I applied a light peachy flesh tone to everything that I had just painted, emphasizing the raised edges. I had to be really careful not to apply too much paint here, as I didn't want to lose any of the details on his face to a single thick coat. Once the skin had fully dried, I came back in with a dark oath wash to help emphasize the recesses and bring some more detail out on his face. Then, while that wash was still wet, I came back in with the same light peachy color that I used before and emphasized some highlights on his cheek and brow and nose. Finally, I came back in with a smaller brush with a reddish tint to it and emphasized his lips. The face was complete, and I can work on the final last details before moving on to our freehand. First, the same snakebite leather that I used on the horse is used here on the knight, so that their leathers match. Then a darker, woodier brown for the polearm. I used something more neutral and darker so that it would stand out against the leathers and make them look like they were made of different materials. And finally, a black wash on all of those shiny metallics to help knock that sheen back. I especially love what this did on the Paladin's chainmail armor, really settling into those recesses and making those rings look a lot more layered, which I absolutely love. I had accidentally knocked my knight's shield off his arm pretty early into trying to paint it, so I just decided to leave it off until I was finished. And thank God that I did this, because if I hadn't, the next step of my painting tutorial would have been a lot more difficult. For you see, it was time for the rest of the freehand that I mentioned at the beginning of the episode. And much like I had done with the chevrons, I first sketched out my design using a pencil onto the shield. For this pattern, I borrowed a design off of the High Priestess surcoat, which happens to be 2 intersecting V's that I drew on with the pencil and then was able to trace using blue paint. Unfortunately, I was not having a lot of luck with my control on this day, so I had to go back in with some white paint afterwards and do cleanup. However, this extra step really helped me refine the pattern to a point that I was happy with it, which means that we can move on to the real challenge of today's video, working on the battle standard. First, I laid my base colors down, blue on the interior fabric and the flapping tails of the banner, followed by a quick blue wash to make it match what I had done on everything else, followed by white on the shield and the pole side. Just like all the other freehand that you've seen me do today, I first sketched my design out with a pencil. Something that was way easier said than done, especially on a rippling uneven surface of a waving banner. But I did manage to sketch out a little bit of a form for me to follow. And I followed it to the best of my ability, but much like before, I wasn't having much success with control. So I gave myself a little bit of leeway, a little bit of a mercy, and allowed myself to be a bit messier, knowing that I could come back and clean it up with some white paint afterwards. Which is exactly what I did, and it worked really well, so much so that I was confident and very happy with the banner, which means that we can move on and actually start gluing our pieces together. I used normal super glue to glue all of the pieces together as they all would have a little bit of paint on them, and I thought I would get a better seal that way. Then after about a 2-hour dry period, I was able to come back in and start adding some tufts to the base. This really helped obfuscate those grass tufts that I had painted earlier, and I love the effect. The last thing that I needed to do was rim the base in black, and now we can take a look at the final model. And here he is, my Bretonnian knight painted up as a paladin from the Sacred Kingdom from Overlord. I genuinely, absolutely adore how my knight turned out. It was a long process. The freehand took a while, but I'm very proud of what I achieved with my freehand because I was able to actually accomplish a couple of different patterns, which I think just opened up my skill set a lot and allows me to be a lot more confident going in and doing other freehand designs on future banners and other just cool things that I end up painting down the line. Who knows what I'll end up doing some freehand on, maybe terrain, I don't know, but whatever I do, I have a lot more confidence after this knight painting tutorial. And I hope that you guys are a lot more confident going into your own painting of a Bretonnian knight or any other kind of banner that you maybe want to do, because that was sort of what I was trying to emphasize in this particular project. I really wanted to emphasize how freehand could be really cool. It's not something that you have to be super scared of, especially if you approach it in I'm gonna sketch out my design first and use that as a way to sort of trace on the paint that I want to put on there, because that's exactly how I handled it every single time. Hopefully you picked up on that as you were watching this tutorial. I would love to know what you think about my knight down below. What future color schemes would you love to see me working with on a knight? And what would you do for your own Bretonnian knights? Would you be really eclectic like what I'm doing, or would you keep them all consistent? I'd love to start a conversation with you down in the comments below. Now, before I head out, I want to give a final thank you not only to my patrons, but also to my YouTube members. Without your guys' support, we would not be doing this. So genuinely, thank you so much for all the support that you have given the Chaos Cultist and I over the years. It really, really means a lot to us. Thank you guys so much for watching today's painting tutorial. I have been Angela, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your hobby night. Bye, everybody.